Welcome back to my channel. My name's Michael, and today I want to talk about Michel Houellebecq and his book Serotonin, which is longlisted for the International Booker Prize. I am going to attempt to try and review all the International Booker Prize long lists. There are two books that I read before it was announced, and I will try putting together some reviews on those, especially Mac and His Problems, which I think is an interesting book, but I read it almost a year ago. So I'm not sure if I need to reread it or just try and work out what I remember of the book. Now, with Michel Houellebecq, it's kind of complicated to talk about. I have very mixed feelings about this author. He is a bit of a dick and he is really controversial. And I had contemplated about reviewing this without actually talking about the book because there is something about that. There is something that he's always talking about that I often think about. I think about a lot. And that's the separation between the art and the artist. I try hard to separate the art and the artist because I think even if you have complicated feelings towards someone, they can produce something interesting. They can produce something worth checking out and worth exploring. There are exceptions. There are times where the person is just too much, too terrible, and that makes it harder. And I think in those cases, it's more about not wanting to support the person because of the things they've done. And that's things like supporting Roman Polanski or Woody Allen. And I think there's a line there, and I think it's interesting. Michel Houellebecq's often been criticised as being misogynistic, as being Islamophobic, as being just an arsehole to people. And while those are terrible things, and I really don't want to support people that are misogynistic, I think with Michel Houellebecq, he's probably doing it because it gains controversy, because he gains a conversation. And I'm not trying to dismiss his terrible actions. I'm not trying to dismiss his personality. I am wanting to talk about that because it is something he often talks about when he's talking about his literature. I just want to read a quote that Michel Houellebecq has once said that I think kind of helps us talk about him as a person and his work. And this is a response to people criticizing him in the reviews of his books rather than reviewing the book. And he says, "First of all, they hate me more than I hate them. What I do reproach them for is bad reviews. It is that they are talking about things that have nothing to do with my books, my mother, my tax exile, and that they caricature me so that I become a symbol of so many unpleasant things: cynicism, nihilism, misogyny. People have stopped reading my books because they've already got an idea about me. To some degree, of course, that's true for everyone. After 2 or 3 novels, a writer can't expect to be read. The critics have already made up their minds." And this is something that I was contemplating a lot about when I saw the long list and I saw Michel Houellebecq on the list. I have read 2 books by Michel Houellebecq. I actually kind of enjoyed them. The Map of the Territory I found was really interesting, and Submission, I cancelled plans to keep reading it. I was really absorbed in that book, and I think it had a lot of stuff to say. And Serotonin, along with Submission and another book of his called Platform, are books that all been categorized as books that have been eerily prophetic by critics. With Submission, there's a lot of talk about the rise of extreme politics and the rise of right-winged politics, like far right-wing politics. And this is to do with an Islamic political party gets voted in France, and then just the reactions to that and the extremism that comes into play. And I've found that fascinating. And then the world has seemed to progress in that direction. With Serotonin, there's a lot to do with globalization and the way the farming industry is struggling with trade and international trade, and a lot of that is really fascinating, really interesting, especially with this growing pandemic. It feels very relevant, it feels very topical, it feels like it has something to say that I found really interesting. Apart from the globalization and the agribusiness side of things, there is another side of this book is about the protagonist exploring his depression, exploring his love life, past and present, and exploring sex tourism, pedophilia, bestiality, all these weird stuff that I think Welbeck always likes to explore. And so the basic premise of the book is it's about a man who's a middle aged man who's just run away from a girlfriend of his. He used to work for the Ministry of Agriculture. He studied agricultural engineering and now he's gone to a rural town and is working with the cheese industry, and he does meet a friend who he went to college with, and they both studied the same thing. This his college friend went on to be a farmer, and you kind of see the issue of globalization on the agricultural industry from a farmer perspective and from a more government type perspective, as the protagonist is a agricultural engineer and work with the government to help farmers. So you get all that, and then on the other side, you're looking at the love life and his feelings towards women and his misogyny and his depression and all these things. And in the book, he starts taking a new antidepressant, which releases serotonin into his body, which is where the name comes from. But this antidepressant kills his libido, and there's not a lot. I would have expected a lot more of this storyline to play out. I think it would have been fascinating, especially with someone like Welbeck, who seems to be obsessed with exploring sex and especially sex in middle aged men. I thought the idea of someone struggling with that, where he's losing his libido, would have been an interesting thing to play out more. And I'm actually kind of disappointed it didn't play out more in this book. But I think there's some interesting elements even in that about the way he's treated women, the way he's treated relationships, the way he reflects on relationships in like a nostalgic way, and while it's not always rose colored, it there's some fascinating elements there, and I don't want to go into too much detail there simply because I think these are things that probably play out in a lot of books. A lot of people like to talk about middle aged men and their sex drive and their relationships. It is a common issue. What I enjoyed about Serotonin the most was the part about globalization and the agricultural industry. I found that really interesting. And like I said, I would have rather explored sex in a way where he struggles with his loss of libido more. I thought that would have been a far more interesting route to explore. Having said all that, I don't know if I'm a fan of this book. I think it's interesting. There's some interesting things to say, but I would not rate it high. I'd say it's middle of the road. Not a bad book, not a good book. It's just there. And I know a lot of people are not going to read this book because of the author, and I understand that. I just think it's an interesting issue to explore, especially considering Michel Houellebecq is someone that is playing with that idea, is using it to help have a conversation around him, even if it's a negative conversation. It's gaining publicity, he's gaining attention. And Michel Houellebecq is an old man. I don't think he's going to change. Unfortunately, he's not going to suddenly become a nicer person, suddenly become someone to emulate. But I wish he would. I wish there was more of a redemption arc for him. He is one of those authors that seem to be very much of a different time, very much an author that is creating controversy because he knows it'll get him attention. And a lot of authors of that type seem to have come out in the 70s and the 80s and early 90s. People like Bret Easton Ellis come to mind when thinking about that. I just don't know how to take it. I like some of his books. I love Submission. I have a few more of his books to read. I just don't know if I'm over him as an author, or am I just someone that needs to move past it and get through his books, or am I a person that just needs to dismiss him like many other people? The struggle with separating art and the artist is always going to be a struggle. It's always something that I contemplate a lot, and I never quite know where the line should be. I mean, if you're raping children, definitely not going to support you. If you are just a bit of an asshole, then I'm not sure. I feel like I shouldn't, but I still want to give people a chance. And that's why I wanted to review the book without talking about the book, because I think that's what most people do with Michel Houellebecq. They dismiss him based on him, they don't give the book a chance. But I feel like there was some interesting things in this book that were worth talking about and worth exploring. If the book sounds interesting, give it a go. If you're not interested in supporting this guy, that's completely understandable. Let's have a conversation down below about Welbeck, about Serotonin if you read it, about the International Booker Prize. And all my links to social media are in the description. I love talking about translations. I love talking about literature, and I want to explore the world of literature outside of the English speaking world. And thanks to translators, I'm able to do that. So that's it for me. I will try and do more of these reviews, and hopefully I'll be back soon in another video. Thank you for watching.